Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about multi-cloud computing and how to control data costs in your multi-cloud deployment. We're looking at the results of a new survey about how companies are using multi-cloud. To discuss that, I'm joined by Jeff Fochtman, Senior Vice President, Business and Marketing at Seagate. Jeff, very good to have you with us today. Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday, and thank you very much. I was with you about a year ago, and I actually was looking at the dates, and I came back and we were talking about Halloween costumes in our last video. And so we're pre-Halloween this time, and I cannot divulge my costume. I'm going to start with that.
Oh, yeah. You're just going to come right out and be really clear. We are not going to know what Jeff is going to dress at, but you are dressing this year.
I always participate. Halloween's a big engagement event at Seagate. Actually, it's just one of those things. Certain companies, lend themselves to other ones, and we've had some really great costume events and things like that. But it's also big at my house. It's a real popular one. I've got younger kids.
Cool. Okay. Well, I was thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to dress, but I might dress after all, based on your words. I like the sound of that.
Good.
All right. So the multi-cloud market, and there's an interesting survey. We want to dig into that. There's some very cool bullet points in that. But before we get to the actual data, let's look big picture a little bit. And what is your sense based on the report? What trends are driving multi-cloud this year?
Yeah. Thanks. So being the marketing person here at Seagate, obviously we are interested in data and storage. But what we took on as we looked into the multi-cloud maturity report was not just aspects about data and storage, but it was how companies are treating data and storage, which by default nowadays means multi-cloud. That's one of the learnings of the survey.
Okay.
But it's taking and looking at the maturity of companies and how they're dealing with that multi-cloud complexity and matching that up with literally how they're performing as a company, how their company performance is doing. And we find a very strong correlation between companies that perform very well, their revenue targets, their forecasts and outlooks, how on time they are for their product delivery, and being in the upper quadrant of handling the complexity of multi-cloud. That's kind of the outcome of the report.
Okay, so if you're good at multi-cloud, you're better at handling data necessarily.
That's right. It's a very strong correlation, so strong that it would lead you to believe it is causal, right? And inside of the report, it gets into that.
Well, I guess the problem with that is that handling data is difficult, and really handling your multi-cloud deployment is also difficult. So it's not like one easy thing can lead you to help with this hard thing. They're both actually pretty complex tasks.
That's right. And, sort of owning that, realizing that, and overcoming that complexity is actually what those higher performing, those 10% of companies that are over indexing have done. The report does also try to give some solutions, gives tangible solutions into how to get there. How do you wrestle this multi-cloud problem statement, the multi-cloud complexity problem statement? Now, remember, why is it a problem statement? Because in many ways, cloud is solving many problems. It is an easy button in many ways for scale. You can deploy it quickly. You can deploy it in whatever CapEx, OpEx option you need to. And all the services are available at a touch point. But what we find, 82% of organizations are using 2 or more cloud instances. 53% are managing over 100 inter-cloud connects. So if you think about it, let me break that down a little bit. Everyone is using multiple cloud providers, right? So 2 is a very norm. Moving up, many expect to move to 4 or more in the future. But within that, what are they doing? Well, think of the myriad of applications then, the myriad of work that needs to be done, the containerization to get that cloud to either their own employees or the end user, the customer, in many of these cases, depending on what the business model is. And that therein lies the complexity. The solution to go to cloud is a great solution, helps you scale, has all the services, but it becomes this sprawling architecture that, if not planned out in advance, is really tough to lasso and knit together into viable enterprise.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the survey itself. You mentioned one of the points that I just think is really interesting. It's a majority, 82%, are using two plus public clouds.
Right.
And that figure is expected to increase to 93% in 2 years. The second data point, also very interesting, it says from the report, a great deal of momentum is taking place among those using 4+ cloud infrastructure providers. 30% of respondents today. The multi-cloud maturity survey shows that this number will more than double in 2 years, rising to 63%. I mean, clearly multi-cloud is, growing by leaps and bounds, which means complexity is almost getting out of control here. What do you take from this data point?
It means that data architects needs to be proactive, right? And so, why do they have all of these different clouds? Well, it's very much individual in regards to that business, where they are, what's their geographic footprint, what's their organizational layout, what other entities are they interconnecting with, what e-commerce platforms are they connecting with, what's their ERP system, how does that interconnect with their cloud and their IT and their data repositories, right? So if you think about it, if I've got 100 different cloud interconnects of 75 different application sets with 2 or 3 major clouds, that's complex even just talking through it, much less thinking about the data workflow. So with those stats, let me get back a little bit and talk about overcoming it, right? Like, what are they doing to overcome it?
And before you do, if I could just make one fast point,
please.
If I'm this hypothetical company that has that many interconnects and that many multi-cloud deployments, I might think to myself, you know what? I think I better hold for the time being because the complexity is out of control. But they're not necessarily doing that. I'm not sure what my question is, but I just think it's interesting that some of them aren't necessarily thinking that.
I'll tell you what, so the leaders do hold long enough to do assessments, right? They do hold long enough to do assessments, but business keeps moving. And any IT steward knows that the operation side and the business side is not going to wait forever. So things need to keep moving. So it's actually part of what you need to do. And it's part of how you think you need to build your organization. You need to build your organization to be capable of doing the right assessments, right? So the report actually looks at 5 specific ways to judge maturity, right? And if you think about those ways, there's cost tool utilization. Are you using a cost tool to understand the decision you're making about where your data is going to go or what platform you're going to operate on? Do you have a forward-looking cost tool assessment before you decide to go somewhere? That's a leading indicator whether you've moved up this maturity stack. Deployment criteria. Do you have an active list of deployment criteria? How many people are going to need access to it? Where, when, how? Do you have those SLAs? Thirdly, do you have monitoring characteristics on your deployment criteria? The leading companies in the maturity report have more deployment criteria. They're looking at more indicators of future value and risk. And then they're putting in place tools that monitor those as they move forward. It's not just a buy and move forward. They've also integrated on the 4th criteria, investment criteria looking forward. So that's an active, like a steering process.
What is the investment criteria what we're going to invest in terms of hardware, software?
That's right. And not only hardware, software, but the idea around, well, what do I need to make that hardware and software work best? So if you go back to number 1 being a cost tool optimization before you make the selection, well, you also need to make sure that you are hiring enough people or outside agencies to monitor those costs. Were they what you expected? It may be a different need than you had in the past when you were on-prem, but you need to think about what are those investment areas needed for your company to make your multi-cloud work right? And some of that is not only around the application, it's around the ongoing costs, the monitoring of the SLAs, and the security of the installations. And then lastly, the 5th area that the report looks at as far as maturity, which is tied to business outcome and success, is automation. And automation seems to sort of be the holy grail. We see a lot of the leading companies do cost tool optimization, deployment criteria, monitoring characteristic. They do investment steering to make sure they're getting better. automation remains a large gap, even for these leaders. And that seems to be kind of maybe the next wave, the next era for the leaders to make progress on.
No doubt that automation is seen as the holy grail in the enterprise these days. If there's one area that's driving the enterprise forward, it's automation. And of course, it's driven by artificial intelligence. Not necessarily our topic today, we may get to it, but it's AI and automation, very, very hot these days. Another data point from the survey, 84% of respondents agree the opportunity exists for the organization to better leverage its existing data to create business value. I'm surprised that number is only 84%. What are the other 16% thinking? But Jeff, what's your take?
Well, I would say if we did a different cut on the data, the 16% who said I'm not getting, or I am getting the full value of my data, they're probably not going to be in the top of the maturity assessment also, because
right. Are you there?
Are definitely utilizing more of their data and getting more value. So we really need to stress that enough. It's not to use your data just for the purposes of saying you're using your data. It's because it delivers real value. Why do 84% of the respondents say that they're definitely not getting full use of their data? Well, we've thrown a lot of stats out, but there was a previous report we did where respondents said that they only use 32% of their data. They only ever use 32%, much less getting the most value. It's because it's hard, and it has to do with a planful data operations view that has been architected to make sure that the right data is getting to the right place at the right time for the right usage. And again, it comes back to proactively looking forward at every single application or every single new decision with this lens of cost, monitoring, and fit within your broader portfolio.
You know, it's interesting. You use the word plan in there, and I think I hear that word more and more these days. And that obviously enterprise IT is so complex. Many companies have adopted portions of it, or even large portions of it, pretty ad hoc, because they've been presenting with a whole menu of shiny new tools. And I think a lot of companies are realizing, you know what, some of this we need to probably think about a little bit more than we have in the past.
That's right.
Another data point, 73% report that their organization is hampered by data retention costs, which limits their ability to maximize data value. In other words, are they saying that data retention is too expensive? In other words, we don't have the proper hardware, software to be retaining our data?
Absolutely. Data costs, ongoing data cost of storage, where at times you're not seeing immediate value from that storage because maybe you can't get the right application set, you can't get a large enough data lake operated to really get the insights delivered from that. And those are all reasons why that respondent, the respondent said, boy, I wish I was getting more. A big part of that is cost. A large part of that is cost. Now, cost comes from many different ways. And this is also something that the maturity report pinpoints, because as you look at cost analysis, it is not just the first lines of storage costs. It's all of the different costs going around, right? There's egress fees, there's API touch charges fees. Every company charges a very different way. And that's why some of these unbiased, I'm not going to list a bunch of TCO cost implementation tools, but absolutely in reading the report, it will give specific indicators towards what SLAs you should be doing long-term cost analysis on, and then go be able to find those tools to do that.
Interesting. So let's zoom out a bit. Look at the future. I mean, given the report's findings and your own sense of the market, what do you see as the future of multi-cloud and containing data costs? I think there's a great urgency for answers to those questions. What are we going to be looking at a few years now for those two hot topics?
That's right. So we talked about automation.
Right.
So that would be one. I think we would see a continuing wave of automation as people get their hand around multi-cloud, as we see more companies moving into this maturity zone that only 10% are in now, where they're doing forward-looking analysis and monitoring. I think automation will be the next wave. That can really create efficiencies that can then help you put your money to work to get insights, to go gather insights, not just be solving that current budget crisis or unexpected bill, right? Which is sort of what we're seeing from most of the players right now. On top of automation, then I would talk about data security and data provenance and encryption. I reflect back, even in our last discussion, we talked some about decentralization, tools like blockchain and how they're disrupting towards a path of data security. And also data provenance. So I think that would be the other sort of future view I would give you on top of automation as two broad categories.
The blockchain piece is particularly interesting because I hear so much of people throw shade at blockchain, like, oh, it's this hype sector, and I hear a lot of that. I also don't necessarily see a lot of new products and like, oh, blockchain is growing. And so you're a blockchain believer?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I am. All technologies go through different hype cycles, and as we know, sometimes it is hype. There are parts of some of these disruption waves that are hype and not real. But blockchain's very disruptive. It has to be right sized. It's not for everything. It's obviously got roots in fintech. And has a natural sort of smart contracts inroads, and those are where I think we've seen already seen serious disruption and capabilities. And what we're starting to see there is secondary waves of disruption. I'm very interested in how carbon markets are interrelated with blockchain and decentralization. And when you talk about that, you're talking about very large governments, climate accords, climate agreements, and tracking of different power and energy usage. And all of that is very leading edge, but scaling quickly. So it's not all about crypto.
Right. No, there are all sorts of many uses, security uses, in particular for blockchain. No doubt about it. I think crypto is only one of those you do blockchain.
That's right.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your insight today. A lot of good stuff. I think the sector is going to be changing quite a bit in the years ahead. Thanks so much, and come back and talk to us again sometime.
I would love to. Yeah, thanks so much. I hope I inspired someone to move up the cloud maturity scale, because it will help their business. And thanks for having me on.
And just as a reminder, people can download that report. They don't even have to give up their email to get the report, right?
Yeah, it's not even gated. They, just do a search for Seagate Multicloud Maturity Report.
Great. Okay. And it's an interesting report. A lot of good stuff in there. All right.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.